From the Toronto Star, I'm Reggie Mudler, and this matters. Streets are for people. It's an old protest chant, but it feels truer than ever, as this pandemic has inspired some significant changes to Toronto's street life. There are kilometers of new bike lanes that are now threading past pop-up patios, which has made it possible for more alfresco dining. On the west and east sides of Toronto, there are two new interesting beaches that have reclaimed barren public space. The only thing that both are missing is water. All of this has been brought on by a medical crisis, but it's in stark contrast to how this city and its people have traditionally dealt with our shared space. To discuss this, we are chatting with someone who's been watching this for a long time. Shawn Micallef is a star columnist who writes about where and how we live in the GTA. He was the founding editor of Spacing magazine, and he's here to talk about public space and Toronto's changing cityscape. Shawn, thank you so much for joining us.
Hello.
So, one of the reasons I wanted to chat with you is you've just written about Bloordale Beach. What is that?
Well, it's a new beach that has appeared in a particularly landlocked part of Toronto. It's got everything you could want in a beach. It's got sand, it's got beach chairs. It just doesn't have water. It was created in a fenced-in empty lot where the Brockton High School used to be, close to the intersection of Bloor and Dufferin on the southwest side. The school was torn down. There's supposed to be a new school built in its place, but there's always a passage, a walkway there that connected Bloor Street down to the Dufferin Mall. And people's, historic walkway is blocked by a fence. That fence might somehow come down. And so the fence was repeatedly taken down. And an artist who lives nearby, named Sherry Kasman, thought it looked like a beach. And she was spending a bit of time there during the pandemic as just a place to be away from people. I think she called it a social distancing compound for a while. And then, she got this idea, as artists do, that this actually, if we called it a beach, it would be nicer. So she started putting up signs, calling it the Bloordale Beach, and then other kind of fun little things around the idea of the beach.
I think this is great because it sort of started as a joke, but it sort of speaks to the larger thing of people starting to try and reclaim space, particularly in this time when we feel really cramped and we've been isolated indoors for so long. But what do you think this says about the city, that people are, basically taking a barren lot and trying to make it a little bit better and use it?
Yeah, like a lot of great art projects, it's fun. It's got a couple different angles. It's fun, but it also has a point. And the thing with the pandemic and the lockdown, we've really seen a lot of Toronto's public space issues really magnified and intensified. This is historically a city that has really narrow sidewalks, right? You didn't notice as much before. You could kind of deal with it. Perhaps if you used a wheelchair, maybe you noticed more than other people did sooner. But once the pandemic hit, it's like, oh, wow, I can't pass somebody more than a foot away from them because the sidewalks are so miserly in the city. So the beach, this kind of big space, big open space in the middle of a crowded part of the city, sort of became, the focus was on it. Like, look, there's more space to have because we don't have other space. And the other maybe component of this is that site, that southwest corner of Bloor and Dufferin, where there's actually 3 schools. 2 of the schools are going to be half torn down, incorporated into a new residential and commercial development. So even more people and more density is coming to that place. And local residents have been asking for more public space, more public amenities, more places to spread out. So it's an ongoing tension that the pandemic kind of exploded.
This is what I find really, really interesting, because I think that that's an ongoing tension throughout the city and where people are clamoring for more green space. Now, what I find really interesting is that this pandemic has also brought in stuff like active TO, the quiet streets, 40 new kilometers of bike lanes, and it's become pretty easy to get a patio created. Now, the thing that I find surprising about that is that at least bike lanes and patios for restaurants were things that were really big fights for a long time in lots of neighborhoods around the city. Isn't it strange that this sort of ramming it through, or can we blame the pandemic for at least some of these positives?
I think a lot of people who are involved in these, decades-long struggles, the Bloor-Danforth bike lane idea goes back to the 70s, I think, people fighting for that. They're kind of scratching their heads going like, how did it happen so fast and seemingly so easy? Is it actually that easy just to do it and the world doesn't fall? So that's one interesting, maybe positive aspect about it. And I wonder when this is over, knock wood, it will be over, are we going to go back to how it was? I don't know. I hope not. I think a lot of these bike lanes will become really personal to people, but also for businesses who, fought for so long. Why can't I just put a table out here on this ample sidewalk when there's still enough room for people to get by? Businesses are going to want that looseness and agileness to still be part of their business life, I think.
It seems really strange to me that there has been very little backlash at this point. Is it because most people aren't home, or that people who commute into the city who might want to fight more for parking aren't there right now? But the other flip side of that is you mentioned businesses. Now, yes, businesses want to have patios on the street, but if we look at the King Street pilot project, there were businesses who were objecting to that. And I'm wondering, businesses have also traditionally been the ones that object to bike lanes being put in front. So I'm just a little surprised that there has been less of a fight. Are you?
I am, yeah. There's still some crankiness. You see it on, in the comment sections and on Twitter and that sort of thing. I think maybe because some of the bike lanes went in at the same time as patios, and it was all an effort to help businesses at the same time as helping, people get around. Maybe that made it easier, smoother. I've been starting to think of the pandemic a bit like a mega project, like say the Pan Am Games of 5 years ago, how we got all this stuff done from high occupancy lanes on the QEW and the Don Valley Parkway to, building new pools, stuff like that. You almost like need this political excuse to make things happen because it shuts a lot of people up. The King Street is interesting, because it was like the first shot at it. I wonder if we tried the King Street pilot project, transit right-of-way on, say, College, where maybe it needs to be, or Dundas, if it would be smoother with a lot of businesses, because maybe businesses would see what advantages they could get out of it. But also some of those businesses on King Street, especially the ones right around the TIFF Lightbox, you can go through the Toronto Star back issues for a couple decades and see them complaining about everything, like from no smoking. When that bylaw came through, that's going to kill our businesses. Well, people stopped smoking inside and the business continued. So there's like this, I don't want to make light of how hard it is to run a business in Toronto, but there is a certain crybaby strain from a particular handful of businesses that were very vocal when the King Street came through. That's very enlightening to look through the back pages and see the history of it all.
I've seen some of those back pages, and I agree with you on some of those people. But we do have to talk a little bit about the negatives, and it's funny. I think the two things that I personally have noticed is it does seem our homeless issues are exacerbated as well, and there are a lot of tent cities that are popping up in parks. And then, of course, the real beaches, the ones with water. There have been a lot of beach parties. Now, I don't want to ask you about chainsaw-wielding weirdos, but there has been, a lot of action down on Cherry Beach and that sort of thing. I will note, it doesn't seem that they've really started any outbreaks, or at least spawned any. But what do you think about some of that stuff that's going on as well?
Yeah, the chainsaw people aside, which is almost like that was the weirdest thing, scariest thing, and then it happened and then now it's gone. It's like the pandemic is bringing everything almost cinematically through us. But yeah, you just notice in every pocket almost of, orphan space, sometimes it's called extra space along railway corridors, in the corner of parks, you'll see tents going up. And I think that's one of the really demonstrative things we can see of like how hard the pandemic is hitting a lot of people. You're seeing it spread out in that way. So that's like one aspect of it. And mostly I think, at least in my neighborhood, I actually kind of live close to the Dufferin Grove. There seems to be a level of tolerance to it. I think people understand that this is one of the hardest times of the century that we're going through, I hope. As for the beach stuff, at first in early summer, you saw a lot of beach shaming. Anytime you saw people in public space together, whether it was a park or on the beach, it was like, why are those people together? And I think it's become apparent that the best place people can be is outside if they're going to gather. I would say sometimes the photos of beaches were often these kind of telephoto lens shots that it's perfectly spread out beach, but it looks like it's all crowded when it's that kind of angle. But then, the parties at Cherry Beach, you're always going to have these, flare-ups, or like that day in Trinity Bellwoods in the spring, that first warm day. But I think mostly it's okay. Like when you go to the beach, you can still kind of find space. However, we have 44 to 50 kilometers, if you include the islands, of lakefront in Toronto. But we have actually actually very few places you can actually swim in the lake. So I think, again, it goes to the point of the lack of really quality public space. We actually need more spaces in Toronto where you can access the lake and go swimming. Release the pressure off of these, really popular places like Cherry Beach.
We'll be right back. I'm really glad you brought up Trinity Bellwoods, actually, because I actually thought a lot of the public shaming about that was a little unfair. But the other thing, too, is like, if you're going to bring circles there, why didn't you bring them to other parks? I live right by Riverdale Park, and it's jammed every night, too. But obviously, it's the best place we can be. So I just find the shaming of public space has been something. Are we over that part yet? I mean, people realize that we have to be outside, right?
Yeah, I think we're mostly over it, but you still see it flare up, right? Like, all it takes is one nicely angled photograph and you kind of see it ripple out on social media. And I think a lot of that is the anxiety kind of we all feel. So I'm trying to think of it a little bit more charitably, but we seem to kind of lighten up. And the circles in Trinity Bellwoods, a lot of what's happened in the last months has been really kind of, reactive and maybe a little bit performative, right? Like showing those pictures of the circles, which is kind of really dramatic and they're weird looking. That kind of sent a message across that, okay, you do actually have to spread out more. So even if your park doesn't have circles, that idea of, hipsters sitting in their little pen will be in people's heads. But this thing has been driven a lot by, media outrages and social media outrages, and Trinity Bellwoods was it. So it just kind of got the focus. And, a lot of people have pointed out that there is a difference how people in Trinity Bellwoods might have been treated if it happened in a park in a different part of the city. So there's a lot of issues that kind of run through this.
Get over the negatives. What more would you like to see? What can we steal from other cool cities? I gotta say, this is not a plug, but in my neighborhood, the Gerrard East Market has opened up. What's the old Joni Mitchell line? I'm going to paraphrase it or flip it around. They took a parking lot and put up paradise. Basically, it's a strip mall, and they put down sand, and it's a beachy parking lot now where you can order drinks with your phone, order from like 8 restaurants right around the area. Right beside Gerrard Square, total urban area. I absolutely love it. Again, it's another beach.
I'm hoping this looseness that a lot of other, cities and cultures have, it's why we travel, why we liked traveling before, because we go to these places that have these really vibrant street markets and patio culture that just kind of spreads out like an octopus through the city, right? And whereas Toronto, this really officious, historically uptight city, it's been really hard to kind of loosen up there. Even now when you see patios, there has to be that fence around it, right? As if like the beers are going to get off the table and walk over to a playground and hang out with children or something. I hope the legacy of this terrible time will be some of the silly uptightness that we've had for both social life and business life and transportation life will loosen up, and we'll be able to pivot more quickly and just kind of allow things to happen and trust that the city will be okay. But yeah, despite these, these flare-ups of this party here and this bad thing there, for 3 million people jammed into this place, it's mostly been okay. We've mostly figured it out. It took a while because it's a new way of, we're used to wanting to be around people. It's taken a while to unlearn what we've known our whole lives, to sort of stay away from people, like that social connection that and desire we have is a hard thing to snuff out, which is actually kind of a great thing. And so if you kind of think of Trinity Bellwoods as, this expression of us wanting to be near each other and trying to learn how not to do that, that's kind of a good sign of humanity, maybe still alive in this isolated city.
I did ask, is there anything that we should steal? The one that people always bring up, drinking in public spaces, drinking in parks. What do you think?
I think so. I think I've written about this a couple times. Toronto, I think, has this idea that everyone has a backyard, but it's actually a city of apartments, small apartments, and a lot of people have zero public space. And on a warm, sunny day, if you want to have a glass of wine with your family picnic or a beer outside, if you have a backyard or a cottage, you can do that. If you don't have any of those, you can't do that. You have to find a crowded patio, perhaps. It's happening informally and the sky doesn't fall. But because we have it still on the books that it's not allowed, I think opens up a lot of people to arbitrary harassment from police and bylaw officers. And we know who will get harassed more than other people. So it's an inequality of city experience, right? If you got the money for the backyard, you can do this. If you don't, you should be able to do it in a park. And there's already laws, if someone's being antisocial, if someone's being drunk and belligerent, that can be dealt with because there's already stuff to deal with that.
What about the winter? The CBC actually just did a good article about how no one's thinking about it. Do you see these patios sticking around? Is there any other ways that we can animate street life when it gets colder?
Yeah, right. I mean, this thing was born in the winter or the end of winter in March when we all decided to stay inside, but we can't probably go back to that. I wonder, trying to think positively about this, Toronto's kind of a city that hibernates in the winter. Will we learn how to embrace winter more? I always think about Nuit Blanche. Nuit Blanche in Toronto is at the end of September. Sometimes it's almost too cold for Nuit Blanche when the cold snap comes. Montreal has their Nuit Blanche in February, like in the deepest part of deep Montreal winter, right? And it's okay. You can be outside. So I think there'll probably be a lot of sales of those patio heaters. Are not that great for the environment, but buy stock in that company, whichever makes those. But maybe there's a way to figure out, tents outside, slightly heated tents so that they're a little more breezy. Again, I think it'll be harder than summer because summer's easy breezy, but that ability to be agile and think of, ad hoc solutions might happen in the winter. But I think we're going to have to get used to being a winter people, put on the parka and sit in a lawn chair, maybe.
I just bought myself a fire pit and I was looking at space heaters just the other day because I do plan to be hanging out and I'm lucky enough to have a backyard. But I do think I need to be hardier this winter. I think the interesting thing for me is the idea that Toronto just might be loosening up. Do you think that really is happening?
It's been interesting to live in Toronto for 20 years. And I came here from Windsor, and I always thought Toronto was the big city, and it, in my imagination of the place, it was much looser. They had way more outdoor life and that sort of thing. Then I get here and I realize it's actually kind of uptight. But over the last 20 years, it's kind of learned to embrace its public spaces. Many of the public spaces have gotten better. The waterfront Toronto's, done these great improvements along Queen's Quay. And you go down there now on a non-pandemic days, and it's teeming with people. And the city, I think it's hard to see when we live here, but it's actually come a long way, despite my current complaints about this sort of thing. So I think it's possible. It was possible without the pandemic to loosen up a bit, and this has just sort of sped it along. So again, trying to think of what are the good legacies of this terrible time. And I think that might be one of them. That the public realm, which often got overlooked in a place like Toronto, compared to some other cities that invest a lot more money and time into making it work, is something we're going to focus a lot more on, hopefully.
Shawn, that's absolutely fabulous for us. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me on.
Shawn Micallef is a city columnist for the Toronto Star. That's it for today. Thanks so much for joining us. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Raju Budler, Adrian Chung, and Saba Etisaz. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattenden, and our director of programming is JP Fosen. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.